said that disclaimer. So again, my name is Lindsay, and tonight we'll be talking about the cetaceans of New York, which includes whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Oh my. So I like to take a moment at the beginning of all of our presentations to thank our partners and sponsors, because without their help and support, we truly would not be able to fulfill our mission of promoting marine conservation through action. And this evening, I would like to specifically recognize New York Connect Kids to Parks and Parks and Trails New York grant programs. So I do have some learning objectives for us this evening. First, I'll give you a brief introduction to Atlantic Marine Conservation Society, or AMCs as we refer to ourselves, because that can be quite a long name. We'll go over the 3 different types of cetaceans, species commonly seen in New York waters, especially during this time of year, the threats that they're facing today, and then of course, and most importantly, how you can help. So first, what is AMCs? So AMCs is essentially an organization that was founded by a group of volunteers in 2016 who were looking to make a difference in the environment. As an organization, we are permitted to respond to stranded marine mammals and sea turtles. So with that, you might be wondering, well, what is a stranded animal, or what is a stranding? A stranded animal is defined as any injured, sick, or deceased animal that's found floating at the surface or that washes up on our shores. So when this happens, we have our team of field biologists that will respond. If the animal is already deceased, we'll actually perform something called a necropsy, which is an autopsy, but on an animal. And we also refer to these necropsies as mortality investigations, because we truly are investigating how this animal lived its life, and then ultimately what caused its life to end. So through these necropsies, we'll look at the external anatomy of the animal and the internal anatomy, which is always really interesting because we can get an inside look at their lungs, their heart, their stomachs. We could even tell what was the last meal that they ate. So this can really clue us into, how these animals are living their lives, and maybe they're present in our waters or eating foods that we didn't realize were a part of their diet, which is always really interesting and exciting. So besides responding to strandings and performing necropsies, we also do wild population assessments of these seal populations that are here during our winter months. So harbor and gray seals more than any other species. So we'll actually go out, capture these seals, and when we capture them, we basically collect the same information that a doctor would want from you at your checkup. So we get their height, their weight, we'll take biological samples from their eyes, their nose, their mouth, we'll take a blood sample, and we'll even attach a flipper tag and then a satellite tag to these animals. The satellite tag is really important because it provides us with information about where these animals are going. Are they hanging around Long Island for all of winter, or maybe they venture down to New Jersey, or maybe they go all the way up to Maine. So we really get a better idea of how they're using the marine environment. And then last but certainly not least, we host education programs like this one with you all this evening. In addition to lectures and presentations, we also host beach cleanups on a weekly basis. And we really try to get out in the environment and inspire people to promote marine conservation through action and become positive stewards of the environment. So we are a small nonprofit organization. Our staff only consists of 8 people. So with that, we rely heavily on our volunteers. So if you look at this picture up here, you'll see 2 of our biologists in their blue shirts and 2 of our volunteers in the white t-shirts. So once our volunteers become trained and go through the proper protocols, they can actually help us respond to strandings and help us perform necropsies, which is what these volunteers are doing here. They are helping begin a necropsy on a stranded, very large loggerhead sea turtle. So in addition to helping us at our strandings and with necropsies, they also help us with education and outreach work, which is great because then they can really share their passion with others. We also have an internship program. So our internships are available for high school and college level students. And internships can be field-based, where they'll strictly help us with our stranding response program. It can be education and outreach focused. Maybe they're more interested in social media or maybe the business side of the organization. So we really have something for everybody. All of the animals that we respond to are either protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act or the Endangered Species Act. So we work very closely with local, state, and federal agencies when we're responding and conducting our research on marine mammals and sea turtles. Also, something I like to point out is that these animals don't always strand in the most easy to access areas. So for example, here in this photo right here is a stranded minke whale, quite large. This is Kim, our lead necropsy coordinator, working with the local Marine Patrol that was in charge of that area. So when we have difficulty accessing these animals, the Marine Patrol and other municipalities really help us navigate the waterways or perhaps navigate the land to access these animals and conduct our work in a safe and timely manner. And we really appreciate their help and support. And last but certainly not least is members of the public. So working with the public is something that I really enjoy. Getting to share our work and our research with them is very exciting. And then also really working together to make a positive impact, whether that's through beach cleanups or education programs or just doing other outreach events. So if you look here at this map, this shows you the marine mammal and sea turtle strandings from 2017 through 2020. So it's 4 years in total of data. If you look down here at the legend, you'll see that blue triangles represent cetaceans, and that is a sample size or an N of 197, which means 197 cetaceans stranded in that 4-year period. The red dots represent pinnipeds, which are seals, and that sample was 326. The green squares represent sea turtles, and that sample size was 349. So as you can see, sea turtles, definitely the higher number for our stranding within those 4 years. But tonight, our focus is cetaceans. So that is whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So you might notice if you're looking here, looking at all the different colors, where do you guys see cetacean stranding most? Along the northern shore, along the southern shore of Long Island? What do you think? And feel free to put your answer in the chat and Allie can read them out.
Is more straight towards the northern shore of Long Island.
Toward the northern shore, so up here.
Yep, someone says South Shore. To South Shore right now.
Oh, we're split.
Oh, actually, South Shore. I think it's South Shore. Yeah.
Right down here, the South Shore.
Yeah, I think it's South Shore.
Great. So yes, you guys would be right. So our cetaceans, so the blue triangles, through this map, we see that they're stranding more along the southern shore of Long Island. Why do you guys think that would be? Think of where they would have to travel to strand along the northern shore. And this is the Atlantic Ocean out here, to put it in perspective.
Someone said it's harder to get into the sound.
Yeah, exactly. So they would have to navigate some narrower waterways to get into the Long Island Sound. That's great. Anything else? Well, that was a good answer. And really, oh.
Yeah, another guess is the water warmer in there?
Yeah, so the water within the Long Island Sound, we do find stays a little bit warmer than the Atlantic, especially during the winter months. But yeah, those are great answers. And so if you think about it, they would have to navigate to get in there. The water might be a little warmer, maybe less food for some of these different species than what they would find out here on the shelf of the Atlantic. And also, if you think about it, New York is along a lot of different cetacean species migration routes from their warmer breeding grounds way down south in the Caribbean up to the great feeding grounds just north of us. So a lot of these different species will just be passing by, but unfortunately, we do find them stranding along our shores or washing up on our shores for a variety of reasons that we'll get into a little bit later. So yes, we do see more cetacean species along our southern shore of Long Island than on the northern shore. So first, we're going to talk about whales this evening. In the chat, has anybody ever seen a whale out in the wild, maybe on a whaling cruise or just from the beach? Has anybody ever seen one? And what species was it, if you know?
Someone said, I believe I saw a whale in SeaWorld. Another person was on a whale watch cruise with Kresley and saw the tip of a humpback whale tail. Someone else saw whales in Mexico.
Ooh.
So the Kresley trip, Kresley is the Coastal Research and Education Society of Long Island, and they do whale watching out of Montauk. So that would have been a, unless this individual was on their annual migration to their annual trip to the coasts, but they weren't. Yep. So on off the coast of Montauk, and another person saw that whales in the Pacific near Santa Cruz.
Yes, awesome. So all over, we've got Montauk, California, Mexico. That's great. So we do have whales in our waters, especially during this time of year. During the summertime, they are here. They're feeding on herring and bunker. So you could definitely see them easily just from shore if you're lucky enough. So this leads us into, there's actually two different types of whales. We have toothed whales and then we have baleen whales. So our toothed whales are also called odontocetes. And this includes our dolphins, whether they are river dolphins or oceanic dolphins. This includes our porpoises, our pilot whales, beaked whales, and also, as you can see in this picture, and probably one of the most well-known, the orca or the killer whale. Also our sperm whales, narwhals, and beluga whales. All of these whales have teeth. So knowing that these types of whales have teeth, what kind of prey items do you think they're going to be eating?
Octopus.
Maybe some octopus, so they could feed on squid, something like that. Good. What else?
Seals.
Seals,
We're talking
yes.
toothed whales, right?
Sorry?
We're talking toothed whales?
Yes. Yep, so our toothed whales could definitely feed on seals, some squid, and they'll feed on larger fish species. They'll actually predate on smaller cetaceans as well at times. So yes, these toothed whales with their teeth are going to be able to feed on these larger prey items than say our baleen whales. So our baleen whales are also called mysticetes. And they feed by filtering or straining their food from the water. So if you see in this photo right here, they have these baleen plates, which I kind of describe as looking like, one of those now, old school bristled brooms with the yellow bristles. Kind of imagine it looking like that. So lots of rows of baleen plates. And when they take that big gulp of water, they push the water back out, and what's left in their mouth is all of these different little organisms that they had at the surface. So that could be shrimp, krill, zooplankton and plankton, maybe even some smaller fish species. So they're not eating very large organisms at all, definitely smaller, but then they need to eat a lot more of it since a lot of our baleen whales are quite large out there in the water. So getting into our sperm whales. So sperm whales are the largest of the toothed whales. So we mentioned they did have teeth. Females can grow to be about 35 feet long and males can grow to be about 50 feet long. So quite large. And they're found in all deep oceans. They range from the equator all the way up to the Arctic. And they're actually named the sperm whale after the waxy substance called spermaceti that's found in their heads. So they don't have these big heads for nothing. The spermaceti is actually an oil sac that helps them focus sound in the water. And this oil was used in oil lamps and lubricants and candles back when whaling was still legal in the United States. So these whales were specifically targeted for over 150 years for that oil that is found within their head. Something pretty interesting you might see in this picture. It might look like they're just hanging out vertical in the water column, and that is what they are doing. So that's actually one way that they position themselves when they are sleeping in the water, which is quite odd and interesting. Moving on to the blue whale. So you might know that the blue whale is thought to be the largest animal to ever inhabit Earth. They can grow to be about 100 feet long, but they are baleen whales. So they're feeding on small crustaceans like little shrimps and krill, but they have to consume up to 8 tons of food every day in order to maintain their proper body weight and composition and keep their body systems functioning well and at peak energy levels. Unfortunately, due to the commercial whaling industry, the population today is less than 10% of what it originally was. But these whales can no longer be hunted, so we're hopeful that their population numbers will increase over time. And the fin whale is the second largest whale. It's about 88 feet long, so only 12 feet shy of the blue whale. These guys are also baleen whales. So you might be noticing a trend here that a lot of our larger whales are baleen whales, which is just so ironic that they're so big, yet they eat the tiniest organisms out there in the marine environment. So it really shows how truly everything is connected in our oceans. So depending on where the fin whales are out in the ocean, they will be feeding on fish and small crustaceans, as well as any organism, smaller organisms that would be at the surface. So now we're moving on to dolphins. Has anybody ever seen dolphins in anywhere out in the wild? You can put your answer in the chat, maybe if you know where you saw them, maybe what species they were.
One person very excitedly says, yes, they saw some in Rockaway.
That is very exciting.
Anyone else see any whales, dolphins in New York? Someone, yep, also saw dolphins in Santa Cruz, California. Yep, someone saw dolphins jumping off the beach from Cupsog at Cupsog County Park. They were very far away, which is good. Someone said
good.
they saw some dolphins in Shirley.
Oh, well, that is very exciting. You guys might notice that all of those locations are along the south shore of Long Island. So right there where the Atlantic Ocean is. So interestingly enough, a little fact. So all dolphins are whales, but not all whales are dolphins. Hopefully I didn't lose you there. But the whale order, which is Cetacea, so we're talking about cetaceans, is divided into several different families, and Delphinidae is one of them. And the family Delphinidae is made up by our dolphin species. So first we're going to talk about our bottlenose dolphin. So these are one of my favorite creatures out in our oceans. They're fairly easy to identify if you spot them out there. They do have a dark, curved or crest-shaped dorsal fin on the top of their back. They are a grayish color, and depending if they're more coastal or offshore species, the coastal bottlenose dolphin is going to be a little bit lighter of a gray color, and offshore is going to be a little bit darker. They have somewhat of a shorter rostrum or nose, but these guys are very intelligent and very tricky out there in the wild. So they are together in groups called pods, and most of these pods are made up of mothers, so mostly females, along with their calves. Calves will stay with their moms for 2 to 3 years, and then if they're females, they stay with the pod, and if they're males, they get booted out of the pod. Can anybody think of why would mothers kick their males out of the pod once they reach a certain age? Why would they do that?
To prevent inbreeding.
Very good. Yes. So to prevent inbreeding, so they don't want their sons mating with the sisters or the aunts or the mom even. So yes, they do boot them out of the pod, and then males will go off. And typically what we see with our bottlenose dolphin species is that males will pair up. So 2 males bonded together is actually thought to be one of the strongest bonds in the animal kingdom. So these males will hunt together, they'll feed together, they even find a female to mate with together, they'll protect each other from predators. So truly best friends for life, if you will. We've also seen that in other dolphin species that might be on the smaller side, maybe it's 3 males together in one group instead of 2. And then we've also seen with some of our larger dolphin species that if they're quite large, the male might not need to pair up with another male. So he'll be on his own. He's very happy living the solo lifestyle because he doesn't really need help from another male if he's big enough to fight off his own predators, get his own females, and find his own food. So our bottlenose dolphins are quite intelligent, as I mentioned earlier, living in their pods. They can communicate with each other. So many studies have been done to understand the sounds and acoustic noises that our bottlenose dolphins make. And something called a signature whistle is what a mother dolphin will give her calf, kind of thought of as like a name. So that whistle is used to call that calf if the calf needs to come back to the mom. And they basically start communicating this signature whistle almost immediately after birth, so the calf can learn it and be able to respond to the mom, usually maybe when she's calling them back from being in trouble. Now moving on to our Atlantic spotted dolphins. So these are an offshore species. If you notice, they might get their name because of their spots. So they are a darker color with lighter spots covering their entire body. These guys also live in pods offshore, and they can be in pods of upwards of 60 or more animals. They're going to be feeding mostly on fish and other squid, so mostly a carnivorous species. And these guys are also a little bit more slender than our bottlenose dolphin species. And you also might notice that their rostrum is a bit thinner and longer than the other species of dolphins. But these guys are fairly easy to identify out in the wild just based on their coloring. Now, the Rizzo's dolphin, you might notice some obvious differences about this species. So if you look at the head area, they don't have a long rostrum like the bottlenose and the Atlantic spotted dolphins. It's almost kind of a blunt into their head, if you will. You'll also see that they're very dark in coloration with the white markings all over them. So those white markings are actually caused by interactions between maybe members of the pod or members of a different pod. And that's because our dolphins interact a lot and get curious with their mouths. They don't have hands like us to be tactile, so they are tactile with their mouths. And as they are a toothed animal or toothed whale, they can leave something called rake marks on each other. And it's basically when they use their teeth to scratch another animal and it leaves kind of this white markings all over them. It's nothing to be concerned about. It's something that we see with many dolphin species, and it just shows up on the Rizzo's dolphin in the way that those rake marks heal over. But these guys are typically going to be found offshore, but we do see them inshore from time to time. And again, like our other dolphin species, they're going to be traveling in pods, and all of those pod members are usually related to each other. So now we're moving on to porpoises. Has anybody ever heard of a porpoise? Maybe you know a type of porpoise. What do you guys think?
I don't think anybody knows what porpoises are, Lindsay. Oh, wait, someone knows of a harbor porpoise.
Very good. My job here is done.
Great.
So yes, we do have harbor porpoises in our waters. They're very similar in appearance to dolphins. They're all classified under the same family order, but actually they're more closely related to narwhals and belugas than the true dolphin species, which I find very interesting. So if you remember from looking at the image of our dolphins, they have more of a curved crescent shaped dorsal fin on top of their back. But harbor porpoises actually have more of a triangular shape. So they're somewhat easy to identify out in the wild since that obviously does not look like a crescent shape. So we can look at that, and we can also look at their position. So some of our dolphin species were quite slender and thin looking, and we like to say our harbor porpoises are a little bit on the chunkier side. So they're a little bit thicker and more muscular looking out there in the wild. So we do have these guys around New York, so definitely keep an eye out for them. They are grayer on top and a little whiter on the bottom. We call this counter shading. Can anybody think of what would be the purpose of an animal having counter shading? So being darker on top and lighter on the bottom. What's the point?
No guesses yet. Just give them a minute. That's a very cool artist rendering of a porpoise. So, yep. One guess says confused predators, and one says it makes them harder to be seen by predators. So yeah,
Perfect. Awesome. So yeah, so imagine you're swimming in the ocean. If the harbor porpoise is below you, you're looking down at the seafloor, and then you're seeing the top of that harbor porpoise that might be blending into the darker colors down there. And then if you are below a harbor porpoise and looking up at the surface of the water where the sunlight is coming in, it's going to be bright, maybe a little wider, clearer. And so you'd be seeing that white underbelly of the harbor porpoise. So it kind of helps them avoid predators and maybe any unwanted attention out there in the ocean. So very good. So now we're going to move on to what do they eat? So we already touched on this a little bit, but obviously our dolphins are carnivorous, so they're going to be eating fish. So they'll eat a bunch of different fish species. They're not really too picky out there. Here in our waters, they'll be eating similar to what the whales are eating. So herring, bunker, be feeding on some porgies that are out there. So really anything that they can get their mouths on, they will be feeding on. I will say dolphins have been known to play with their food at times. So they do this by kind of just throwing their food around. Everything we're told not to do, don't play with your food at the table. Dolphins obviously did not get that lesson. So they play with them quite a bit. They've also been known to play with stingrays, which gets them into a little bit of trouble because if anybody has ever seen a stingray before, you know that they have a barb on the end. They will use that barb to defend themselves, and the barb will actually detach from the stinging part of the tail part of the stingray. So this can get them into a little bit of trouble, as in those barbs can actually penetrate through the dolphin's skin and perhaps land in a lung or their heart or even their eye. And it could lead to infection if it's left in there and doesn't make its way out. So they definitely do get themselves into a little bit of trouble out there with their food choices. And they use tools. As I mentioned earlier, dolphins are extremely intelligent. There are two populations of dolphins that are very heavily studied. The Sarasota Bay dolphin population near Sarasota, Florida, and then in Shark Bay, Australia. Something that scientists have learned with Shark Bay dolphins is that they use tools. So mothers will teach their female calves, so they're only teaching this to their female offspring, to use sea sponges as a protection on their rostrum. So as you see in this photo here, the dolphin is biting the sponge in between its two lips, and they are using the sponge to block their rostrum. Then they go and they dig their rostrum into the sand or sediment on the seafloor, and that stirs up a bunch of different fish and other organisms that they might like to snack on. And then they're able to go after their prey, but they don't scratch or hurt their rostrum in the process of digging the sediment. So extremely interesting. This is really one of the only populations of dolphins that we've seen do this. So that's why it's been determined that they're passing it down generation through generation, and it's only females sharing it with their female offspring. And then krill. So as we talked about earlier, krill is a big part of our baleen whales' diets. They will eat tons of krill every day at the surface of the water, but because they're huge animals, they are consuming a lot of krill. So thankfully, krill reproduces quite quickly, so those population numbers stay high for our whale species to feed on. And as you can see here, they are quite tiny. So I actually have here a video of a pod of orcas attempting to feed on a seal.
People come to Antarctica for the wildlife, but today on board National Geographic Explorer, we found something spectacular. A pod of killer whales, spy hopping in the distance, narrowing in on their target, a crab-eater seal upon the ice.
innocent seal sitting on the ice, and the intelligent pod of, I guess it was 4 whales, were systematically knocking him off the ice. And he was fast as heck and was scooting back onto the ice every time.
What they're doing is a tactic that is found only amongst these species, using their conjoined effort to wave wash the seal off the ice.
After several attempts of trying to wash the crab-eater seal off of the ice floe, the killer whales tried to crack the ice into smaller pieces.
And they chipped away until they destroyed the ice.
The ice floe that the seal is upon is growing smaller and smaller, but it has escaped and found another ice floe on the starboard side.
They made a run, and as soon as they made the run and their backs were turned, he made a dash perpendicular to where they were.
Got away, man. Can't believe it. Took off running.
The group decided to name the seal Kevin, and Kevin got away. So it was good news for all of us and a great time on board.
This is truly one of the most amazing encounters any of us have witnessed in the wild.
So I know that video looked very exciting. I'm sure it was very exciting to be on board and watching it. So as you probably noticed in the video, there was one smaller orca than all the others. So that was a pod of orcas. It's my guess that it's probably females, and they are teaching this feeding mechanism to the young orca that was a part of their pod. So again, these feeding techniques are passed down from generation through generation. But something to remember is that, so that crab-eater seal would have been quite a big meal for that pod of orcas to share amongst each other. So that's something that they do. They'll hunt prey together. And then even if perhaps the matriarch goes off and is able to catch prey items, she'll actually bring them back to her pod to share. So they're quite selfless in that sense. But that kind of feeding technique is definitely big risk and big reward. So they had to use a lot of their energy to continuously keep doing the swimming pattern and trying to knock the crab-eater seal off of the ice in hopes that they would regain all that energy back by having quite a big meal to have. So then when they feed on smaller fish items, maybe some smaller other prey, they're not using as much energy, but also it's not as big of a meal. So not only do our dolphins and our orcas, so our toothed whales, have feeding mechanisms where they all work together, so do our baleen whales. So next we are going to watch a video of some whales bubble netting.
There they come, right there, big bubble net. They just did the bubble net.
Well, we're spending our morning watching one of the most exciting biological phenomena any place to be seen, the bubble net feeding behavior of humpback whales. It is exciting in the extreme.
You got a group of animals all traveling together. They know where the prey is before they dive or have some sense of it. A single animal breaks off from the group,
Dive down, it starts spiraling upwards and blowing air out of its blowhole, which rises up and creates that cylinder of bubbles. Now, almost certainly they're doing that above where the fish are located because of the constraints on bubbles traveling to the surface. It can't be that deep when they deploy it, and the fish tend to be located below that depth. So the remaining animals have to force that prey up into that pre-existing bubble net that's already been deployed. And so what seems to happen is one individual will vocalize in an effort to drive the fish up towards the surface, while the remaining animals seem to flank that group of herring, that school of herring, chain them, corral them as they're being pushed into the existing bubble net. And then once that happens, just before they break the surface, when this occurs, the whales actually come from outside of the bubble net, convene in the center, and do that final push to the surface.
Whoa.
Sweet! Beautiful.
So a very interesting feeding technique that is a learned behavior. So they have to share how to do the bubble netting and the lunge feeding with members of their pod. So I always find it really, intriguing that these animals truly live in these close-knit communities and, feed and essentially do everything in their daily life together. I find it very inspiring. So what species do we see most often in New York? So within Shinnecock Bay, we do find bottlenose dolphins, and it kind of sounds like you guys have seen dolphins along the southern shore of Long Island as well. So again, these guys are going to be in pods of just a few animals to upwards of 50 or 60. So if there's one, there's typically more. So always keep your eye out.
Hey, Lindsay, these bottlenose dolphins in the photo you were just seeing were sighted just south of Shinnecock Bay, out in the ocean. I think it's somewhat common to see bottlenose dolphins or some other kinds of dolphins in small numbers in the bays, but the large pods are usually in the ocean or in Long Island Sound, which is pretty amazing. But we have seen pods of over 100 dolphins at times pretty far west into Long Island Sound.
Yeah. So moving on to the short-beaked common dolphin. So this is another quite abundant and familiar dolphin out in the waters. They're highly social, very energetic, and really widely distributed. So they can be anywhere from the warm tropical waters to cooler temperate waters. They can be found inshore, offshore. So definitely keep an eye out for these guys. You'll notice comparing them to our bottlenose dolphin, they do have some white on their sides. Their rostrum is a bit narrower and thinner, and they have white on their pectoral flippers as well. So these guys are often associated with underwater ridges and continental shelves where upwelling happens. And upwelling is where deep, cold, nutrient-rich water rises toward the surface. And that's where they find all of their yummy prey items. So they're pretty smart to hang in those areas. But again, usually found in large social groups to upwards of 100 animals and even larger pods than that, which are referred to as megapods, and they consist of up to almost 10,000 animals, and all of those pods are really thought to consist of smaller subgroups of maybe 20 to 30 individuals that are either possibly related, or maybe they're grouped by their sex or their age. So very interesting if you ever were to see a huge pod of dolphins like that. And these guys actually typically rest during the day, and then they feed at night, which is another reason that they're going to hang out along those continental shelves and wait for some of those yummier prey items that are more active at nighttime. So getting into our minke whales. So we do have these guys in our waters, and they are a type of baleen whale, which is the giveaway is usually the throat grooves you see here at the bottom. These guys are somewhat easier to identify out there if you were on a boat or on the beach. They've got white along their belly, again, counter shading, and the white creeps up a little bit on their sides. They do have white on their pectoral flippers. If you look here at their dorsal fin, it sits a little bit farther back on their back, and it is crescent shaped and quite dark. So typically not as prominent as what you would see a dolphin or a harbor porpoise. So somewhat easier to identify out there. And these guys can grow to be about 25 to 35 feet long. So definitely a larger whale species that we see out in our waters. And then, of course, we have humpback whales, especially during the summer months when we're going to be seeing these guys. So before the moratorium on whaling that was put into place in the 1980s, basically all populations of humpback whales were greatly reduced, some by 95%. Thankfully, the species is increasing in abundance these days, but they do face some threats out there, which we're going to get into in just a few minutes. But humpback whales live all over the world. They travel incredible distances every year. They have the longest migrations of any mammal on the planet. Some populations of humpbacks will swim 5,000 miles from the tropical breeding grounds to colder and more productive feeding grounds. And again, our humpbacks are baleen whales, which means they're going to be feeding on krill and some smaller fish and filtering that food through their baleen plates. But they do have a beautiful song. So a lot of people refer to humpbacks as the singing whales, and I'll play a brief little clip for you. So scientists have found that males often are singing these songs, especially in the breeding grounds, and they can sing these songs for hours, and these songs can be heard more than 20 miles away from the whale. Obviously, low frequency portions of their songs are able to travel much farther in the deep ocean water. But males will actually change their songs from year to year as well. So I like to think maybe they're keeping it fresh, trying to keep it a little spicy for the females, but really coming up with truly beautiful, audible tunes in our ocean waters. Now getting into the North Atlantic right whale. So perhaps you guys have heard of this whale before. It's actually listed as one of the most endangered large whale species in the world, with less than 400 individuals left, because they were actually hunted almost to extinction before the whaling moratorium. They actually received their name, the right whale, because they were considered the right whale to hunt, because once they were harpooned, they would typically float at the surface and be easier to collect and take into shore. But if you look at their heads here in this photo, you might notice some white bumps on there. It's something called callosities, and these bumps are actually formed by essentially whale lice. So their bodies are actually mostly black, except for that white on their forehead. And those white bumps can create very individualized patterns on them, which actually helps researchers to identify them out there in the wild. But unfortunately, their numbers are quite low. But something that was exciting for us to see this year is actually just off of the shore in West Hampton Beach during, I believe, late February, early March. We actually had a member of the public have a sighting of a mother-calf pair, which was great. And we were all elated because since their population numbers are so low, to have a calf spotting that looks healthy, and they were on their migration route, it kind of gives the science community a little bit of hope that this population is going to be able to rebound, and we will be able to see their population numbers increase, and hopefully we do not see the extinction of this species in our lifetime. So now this map, we do still need to update it with our 2020 data. We're still working through that. But our large whale strandings across Long Island from 2017 through 2019 are shown here on this map. And as you can see, we've had quite a few, mostly along the southern shore, as we spoke about earlier, why we find more strandings of cetaceans along the south shore of Long Island. And as you can see, a lot of them are our humpback whales. So those are the blue squares. So we know they're in our waters, we know they're here, and they are stranding. So these strandings really provide us, you know, an inside look at these animals and able to understand more about them, especially since we're seeing them so frequently in our waters. So now we're going to get into some of the threats that they're facing today. Unfortunately, marine debris ingestion is something we see far too often in any marine animal. So this is an image of Kim, our lead necropsy coordinator, with a Rizzo's dolphin. So remember earlier we went through the different species. Rizzos are mostly dark with those kind of white looking scratches all over them. Again, quite a large animal. And unfortunately, the Rizzo's dolphin was found to have this very large trash bag, about 30-gallon trash bag, in its stomach, along with these smaller plastic bags as well. Unfortunately, those were determined to be the cause of death for the Rizzo's dolphin. And that was supported also by the blubber thickness of the animal. So the blubber was quite thin, which means that that animal had been using its fat stores for quite some time in order to keep its energy level up, because those plastic bags were blocking the stomach and the digestive tract. So it wasn't able to eat and keep down other food items. Again, something we see far too often these days. So this is an image of a sei whale. This is actually down in Virginia. So it's not up here in New York, but again, a very large, it was 45 feet long, was a female, and she had ingested this whole DVD case and another smaller part of a DVD case. And those were found in the GI tract of this animal, and they were determined to be the cause of death. So something that is obviously extremely unfortunate, and we find that a lot of baleen whales and animals that might be filter feeding at the surface are coming in contact with marine debris that's found floating there. So they, you know, go to eat and they don't realize that that's mixed in with their food items, or maybe they mistake it for food. So when this happens, obviously it can block their digestive tract, but then if they realize that they're eating these items and it's not their normal food items, they're not getting the proper nutrients and energy that they should be from their eating. So it's definitely something that can affect animals either immediately or over a long period of time. Now getting into entanglement. So this is actually within the New York Bight. This is a humpback whale just last summer that we worked with the Center for Coastal Studies to respond to. This animal was entangled by gear that was wrapped around its peduncle and its flukes, and I actually have a diagram. I will show you of that in just a minute. But we realized that this animal had been entangled and basically stuck in this one placement for at least 4 days, because that's how long it took AMCs to work with the Center for Coastal Studies to be able to successfully disentangle this animal. But unfortunately, humpbacks and North Atlantic right whales and other large whale species get caught in all different types of fishing gear, whether it's traps and pots, or maybe it's gill nets or ropes. And once they're entangled, you know, the whale could keep swimming and drag that gear on and on, which obviously, if it's quite heavy, causes them to use a good bit of their energy. But it can also lead to them not being able to feed properly. They're probably not swimming to their best of their ability. And then that entanglement can actually become embedded on, whether it's on their flippers, their head, maybe their tail. And that embedment could lead to an infection or even possibly amputation if the entanglement is on there for a long enough period of time. So it truly has a devastating impact on these animals when they are in an entanglement. So how this animal was able to, you know, basically rest and hang out at the surface and keep its blowhole just above the water to continue to take breaths is truly most likely what saved it from not drowning. Because as you can see, the gear was wrapped around that peduncle area, is what we call the muscle that connects the rest of the body to the flukes or the tail. And the gear was just pulling the animal down. So thankfully, though, with the efforts of the Center for Coastal Studies, they were able to disentangle this animal. And vessel strikes is something that we see with our whale species. So this is an image of a North Atlantic right whale from this year that was struck by a vessel down in Florida. This is actually, it stranded in St. Augustine. And so as you can see, vessels can cut quite deep into our cetacean species. Our sea turtles and seals are also at risk of this as well. So once a vessel strikes the animal, unfortunately, we don't see too many recoveries from that, especially because a lot of our animal species, their lungs are situated just on their backs, or other important organ systems. And so the vessel can have almost an immediate impact on that animal's quality of life and ability just to breathe and do its normal activities out there in the wild. So unfortunately, we see this quite a bit with large whale species because some of our larger vessels out there on the water are also traveling through the whales' migration routes. And sometimes the whales just aren't able to avoid the vessels as much as we wish they could. And so unfortunately, this does seem to happen quite frequently. So something else that is a huge threat to our cetacean species is ocean noise from human activities like shipping and boating, even construction, energy exploration, and oil drilling. So this video, I really think it kind of explains it better than I ever could. So I hope you guys are able to enjoy it. And we'll discuss it afterwards.
Cetaceans have lived in our oceans for millions of years. The smallest one, the Hector's dolphin, is about 20 times smaller than the blue whale, the largest living organism on Earth. Its heart is so big that a person could almost stand in it. Cetaceans find their way even in darkest ocean depths. They emit calls and detect obstacles and prey from the reflected echoes. Cetaceans often communicate with each other. They stay in touch by calling to each other when spread out and likely exchange information on the occurrence of prey or predators. Some species can only reproduce because they can communicate for hundreds of kilometers and thus find each other. But underwater noise is increasingly masking the acoustic world of cetaceans. Noise levels in the oceans have doubled every decade for the past 60 years in some areas due to various human activities. Without countermeasures, underwater noise will further increase. Over 90% of world trade is transported by ship. Ship propellers generate intense noise. cetaceans are exposed to ever-present noise in major shipping routes. Once a ship has passed, another will follow shortly. Chronic noise causes stress, which in turn affects the health of cetaceans and may also reduce their breeding success. Whales are acutely threatened during military exercises when warships turn on their sonar. The extremely loud sonar sounds spread for tens to hundreds of miles in all directions and are used to detect submarines. Whales appear to change their diving behavior in panic to escape the noise. This seems to cause divers' bends or decompression sickness, affecting vital organs, which can lead to death. Some fatally injured or dead animals beach on the shore, but many die unnoticed in the open sea and sink. The noise caused by seismic exploration for oil and gas is also loud, pervasive, and continuous. During the ship surveys, seismic air guns produce intense pulsed noise every few seconds, often for weeks or months. Airgun pulses are so loud that they can travel through thousands of meters of water and penetrate tens to hundreds of kilometers into the Earth's crust. The echo reverberates from oil and gas deposits all the way back to the measuring devices at the surface. The noise can cause the marine environment to be heavily degraded over large areas, forcing some marine life to abandon their habitat. Thus, the livelihood of cetaceans may be destroyed, and so their life. Underwater noise pollution is a serious threat to marine life. Together, we can change this situation.
So I hope you guys were able to take something away from that video. Unfortunately, there are a lot of noises out there in our ocean that are having an impact on these animals, and something we should definitely think about as we're moving forward in coastal development and things like that. So I'll leave you with this. We usually like to finish our presentations just briefly going through this slide here. So something that you guys can do to help not just cetaceans, but all marine species is keep our beaches clean. So whether that means when you visit the beach, you take your trash with you and maybe any other trash you might find while you're down there. Maybe you join us or your local community for a beach cleanup and really try to keep that area as clean as possible. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, all the animals we respond to are protected either by the Marine Mammal Protection Act or the Endangered Species Act. So there is a law saying that you should stay 150 feet away from any of these animals, whether in the water or on the beach. And that's not just for the animal's safety, but it's for your safety as well. And please report any marine mammal or sea turtle sightings to us. We'll put this email in the chat, but you can report any of your sightings to sightings@amcs.org. So I know we spoke a lot about how we respond to strandings and injured or sick or deceased marine mammals and sea turtles, but we also really like to hear reports and know where these animals are seen healthy and thriving out in their environment. So if you guys were to see a lot of dolphins off the Rockaways, or maybe you saw a whale off of Montauk, that's information that we would want to know. So please definitely share that with us. And if you ever happen to come across a stranded marine mammal or sea turtle, please report it to the New York State Stranding Hotline. We'll also put this number in the chat, but it is 631-369-9829. And I encourage you, go ahead, put it in your phone now, or at least write it down, because it's not usually a marine biologist that's coming across the stranded marine mammal or sea turtle. It's a member of the general public. So if you go ahead and have this number in your phone, then you've really taken the first step to getting that animal the proper help and response that it needs when it is out of the marine environment. So with that, if anybody has any questions about anything we discussed this evening, I would be happy to answer your questions, and you can either put them in the chat, or if you're comfortable, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
I have a question. I just want to say, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Thank you, Kirkland.
Okay, sorry. I have a comment first. Wonderful presentation. I loved it. It's my first time here. I just have a question because I was going over the website that you guys have, and I looked at some of the research projects that you have done in the past and to help protect the marine animals. I do have a question though. Have any one of you, sorry, have any one of you tried finding like the algae bloom and how it also affects marine animals? Because I know that does have a play into like the decline of the population because of the toxic water, and it's usually like the spring, summertime it comes.
Yeah, I don't know if any of our research projects have focused on that specifically. It's definitely something that we are aware of. And unfortunately, some of those blooms are made worse because of, high nutrient levels in the water or pollution. But some of those blooms actually happen quite naturally. They kind of go through the ebbs and flows, but we're definitely somewhat making it worse through pollution, and then that pollution leading to the nutrient levels. So it's not something that we've specifically focused on, but definitely something that we could look into. Allie, I don't know if you have any thoughts to share.
Yeah, it is a really good question, and it definitely is something that we always think about, but our research does focus on the marine mammals and sea turtles, especially with the necropsies. We will take samples of the animal's stomach contents. So if there was a harmful algal bloom and the animal ate something, we could test for that. So we would be able to find out if a harmful algal bloom was contributory to the animal's death, but we don't necessarily test we don't take water samples on a regular basis or anything like that to test for harmful algal blooms. But we do work with a lot of researchers in the area who are doing that kind of study. And I know that our excuse me, our necropsy coordinator, Kimberly Durham, in 2015 actually collaborated and worked on a study of diamondback terrapins. There was a very big die-off of diamondback terrapins in the Peconic Bays, which is up on the North Fork of Long Island. And through the necropsy of all of those animals, even though we don't generally respond to marine or aquatic turtles, I should say, or land turtles, she did, collaborate with a couple of the researchers, and they did find that a harmful algal bloom was the cause of this die-off of diamondback terrapins. So it's something that we are, as Lindsay said, quite aware of.
Yeah, great question.
I'm impressed that you were on our website. If you have any thoughts on how to, if there's anything that you thought was missing there or that we should be thinking about, definitely feel free to reach out and let us know. We always like constructive criticism. Lindsay, we do have a great question. What are the next steps for volunteering or getting involved?
Great question. So you would reach out. You can copy myself on the email. This is my email right here, education@amcs.org. You would also email our volunteer coordinator, Jennifer Scallo, at volunteers@amcs.org, and Allie can put that in the chat for you. But please copy myself on the email as well, and we'll get you set up as a volunteer. So typically the first steps to volunteer with us is that you go through an orientation, which is just an hour-long virtual presentation, kind of getting you accustomed to our organization, more than what I shared with you guys this evening, and the different facets of the organization that you can be involved with, and then the steps to take to achieve whatever goal you have set for yourself. If you're wanting to help with strandings and necropsies, maybe you're wanting to help lead education programs or beach cleanup events. So please reach out to us and we would be happy to get you set up as a volunteer.
That was a great question. Thank you. Anyone else have any other questions?
And I know I threw a lot of information at you guys in the last hour and 15 minutes. So if you think of your question later, or maybe you're not comfortable asking it right now, please feel free to email me. Again, this is my email right here, education@amcs.org. And my name is Lindsay, and I would be happy to answer your question through email, or if you would prefer to give us a call, we could do that as well.
One comment, thank you very much for a wonderful educational presentation. That's always really nice to hear.
Yes, you guys are more than welcome. It's our pleasure to share with you this information. So with that, I want to say, if nobody else has any other questions, thank you all so much for joining us this evening and spending time with us and learning about the cetaceans of New York. And hopefully you're able to join us for another education or outreach event, or maybe we'll see you as a volunteer in the future.